Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudhirayet. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, Narayana, unto Narayana Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nashta prayeshva bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So I'm just going to share my screen now so we can see the verse together. Okay, so again, reading from Canto 9, Chapter 6, Text 47. Yadgarhastyam tu samvikshya Yadgarhastyam tu samvikshya Saptadvipavati pati Saptadvipavati pati Vismita stambam ajahat Vismita stambam ajahat Sarvabhoma shriyanvitam Sarvabhoma shriyanvitam. And word for word, yat, he whose, garhastyam, family life, householder life, to, but, samvikshya, observing, sapta dvipa vati patihi, mandhata, who is the king of the entire world, consisting of 7 islands, sapta, right? Sapta dvipa. Vismitaha, was struck with wonder. Stambham, pride due to a prestigious position. Ajahat, he gave up. Sarvabhoma, the emperor of the entire world. Shriya anvitam, blessed with all kinds of opulence. Translation: Mandhata, the king of the entire world, consisting of 7 islands, was struck with wonder when he saw the household opulence of Sobhari Muni. Thus he gave up his false prestige in his position as emperor of the world. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, everyone is proud of his own position, but here was an astounding experience in which the emperor of the entire world felt himself defeated in all details of material happiness by the opulence of Sobhari Muni. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nitinamani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshtarni Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So again, the translation for today is Mandhata, the king of the entire world, consisting of 7 islands, was struck with wonder when he saw the household opulence of Sobhari Muni. Thus he gave up his false prestige in his position as emperor of the world. Okay, so I wanted to mention that Srimad Bhagavatam is so wonderful that even if there's a simple verse and 1 line purport, there's so much to extract from it, so much nectar. So today, what I would like to do is set the scene again a little bit, just so we know the context of this verse, and share a few facts that some of you may not be aware of with some information from a lecture that I recently heard from His Holiness Irdumna Maharaj on Sobhari Muni. So there's a few interesting details that I'll share. And then I would like to discuss two of the traits that we see of Mandhata Muni in this verse, two characteristics that we can take with us, that we can learn from his example here. The first one being that he's letting go of false prestige or pride, and the second being that he's free from this desire to be competitive or envious. So we'll look at those after we set the scene a little bit. So some of you may not know that this event, this entire pastime, is taking place in Satya Yuga, which makes sense when you think about how Sobhari Muni was under the water, the river Yamuna, for 1,000 years. So in that sense, it fits well with the extended lives that people lived in Satya Yuga. Sobhari Muni actually grew up in the forests of Vrindavan. So that's a very interesting little piece of transcendental trivia. And when he is in this current verse, when Mandhata comes to visit him and his daughters, right? All of Mandhata's daughters had married Sobhari Muni. When Mandhata comes to visit Sobhari Muni, this location is actually near the foot of Govardhan Hill. So, and this is described by the Acharyas, so that Sobhari Muni had, out of the power of his mystic potency, had created a opulent residence for his wives at the foot of Govardhan Hill. So very auspicious place. Now, remember from earlier in this chapter about the description of Mandhata Maharaj, the great emperor. I would like to just share that again so we remember a little bit about his characteristics and who he was. So Mandhata, the son of Yuvanashva, was the cause of fear for Ravana and other thieves and rogues who caused anxiety. O King Parikshit, because they feared him, the son of Yuvanashva was known as Trasadasyu. This name was given by King Indra. By the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the son of Yuvanashva was so powerful that when he became emperor, he ruled the entire world, consisting of 7 islands, without any second ruler. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is not different from the auspicious aspects of great sacrifices, such as the ingredients of the sacrifice, the chanting of Vedic hymns, the regulative principles, the performer, the priests, the result of the sacrifice, the arena of the sacrifice, and the time of sacrifice. Knowing the principles of self-realization, Mandhata worshipped that transcendentally situated Supreme Soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Vishnu, who comprises all the demigods. He also gave immense charity to the Brahmanas, and thus he performed yajna to worship the Lord. All places from where the sun rises on the horizon, shining brilliantly, to where the sun sets, are known as the possession of the celebrated Mandhata, the son of Yuvanashva. So that's just to remember his powerful position in this world. He was the emperor of the entire world, and he was also very pious and a servant of Lord Vishnu. So he would worship Vishnu and give immense charity to the Brahmanas. So this very exalted devotee of the Lord. And his daughters were married to Sobhari Muni. So when he came to visit Sobhari Muni in the town of Govardhan, he had this epiphany, this realization by observing Sobhari Muni's opulent life with all of his wives. Mandhata realized that in that moment that temporary things don't bring real satisfaction. And he actually had the realizations that Sobhari Muni would later have at a later point in his life about dissatisfaction and regret. So he's having it a little bit earlier just by observing Sobhari Muni's situation. So yesterday we had Urmila Devi giving a wonderful class. She mentioned that sometimes something external can spark an internal realization. So observing another person's situation can bring a realization of our own journey, our own spiritual journey, and whether we want to go through that or not, and we can choose. So in this story, Mandata is demonstrating that he learned just by observation from another's life experience. And he realized too that penance and austerity offer greater rewards than the opulence of royal life. So in that moment, all within a very short visit, he had all these realizations that I don't want this anymore. I'm gonna give up my kingdom, my whole entire, basically the world, my emperor, role of an emperor, and retire to the Himalayan mountains. So his dissatisfaction, he learned in that moment dissatisfaction of material things, that he didn't want to regret his own experience, and he wanted to then turn over to spiritual life and just focus on that. So this gives us an example of how each person's journey, each person's spiritual journey is unique to that individual. And that's because the Paramatma is individually reciprocating with each soul's journey and efforts to come closer to Krishna, right? Their spiritual journey. So in this particular case, what worked best for Mandata was unique to his situation. He needed to see the super opulent life of Sobhari Muni and all of Mandata's daughters living with him and their family, their children, and in order to get that realization. So that was what he needed, and he was guided in that way through Paramatma. And again, Urmila Prabhu yesterday said that she mentioned Pingala as another example of that, where she was in this, you could say, external situation of waiting for a lover, and she had that realization from Paramatma within, due to the external situation, that this is no longer what I want. I want something more. I want something spiritual, and that awakening of spiritual yearning. Interestingly, Mandata asked Sobhari Muni for a blessing before he left. And this is again described by the Acharyas in their description of this pastime, that Sobhari Muni was a very powerful Muni, right? So Mandata went to him very humbly and said, I would like to get a blessing of a prayer that I can, like a kavacha, a prayer, protection prayer that I can take with me when I go on my journey to the mountains, that will protect me from again getting entangled in this world. And so Sobhari Muni gave him the Yamuna kavacha, the prayer to Yamuna Devi. So that's very powerful to pray to this great river Yamuna Devi for protection. So that was the prayer that he took with him, the kavacha mantra. So just as he learned from Sobhari Muni's life in that moment, when he just by observation, similarly, the Bhagavatam is repeatedly giving us these pastimes so that we can also take some lessons from them, and we can take inspiration for our own lives from the stories and pastimes that we read. So in that sense, I would like to transition to discussing the characteristic of Mandata as demonstrated in this verse. So in the verse, this Sanskrit word, stambham, is used to describe pride due to a prestigious position. So you could say false prestige, you could say pride, arrogance, conceit. But the term false is important. So adding that word, false prestige, right? Because it's false because we are thinking that we think that we are the controller. We think we are the one who created something, like basically a version of being God. Like I'm proud of this because I think it's me, I think it's mine, and so on. So that's why it's false prestige. And in this particular moment, Mandata is letting go of false prestige by observing the situation. So the word stambam, you might have remember it from Garuda Stamba, right? The column Garuda, or in the verse of where Hiranyakashipu hits the pillar And Nrsingadev comes out of the stambam, right? That's the Sanskrit word. So it can also mean a post, a pillar, a column. And it can mean like the verb to prop up or to support or to strengthen. So there's an interesting connection between these two definitions. And I got this from a talk that I had with His Holiness Hridayananda Das Goswami. I asked him about this word stambam and about the possible connection between the definition of pillar, column, and pretentious, arrogant pride. And there is an interesting little connection here. When someone is proud, immediately we get this image. Think about, even in these cartoons where they depict people in a very exaggerated sense. Pride is depicted as someone with their nose up in the air, full of, like stiff, like very, you think of their body language. They're full of like this sense of being stiff and unbending. It's all about me. I'm in control. And so in that sense, they're kind of like the column. They're stiff, rigid. And Hridayananda Das Goswami mentioned the English term to be stuck up with pride, right? So there's that phrase, oh, she's so stuck up, and he's so stuck up, meaning so full of themselves, so proud. And again, it's that imagery of being stuck up, like rigid, like a stick. So I thought that was interesting, that realization that he shared about the word stambam. And because we just had Lord Nrsingadev's appearance day, I'm thinking about how in that pastime with Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad, we see this amazing contrast between a person, Hiranyakashipu, who is so full of pride, so full of this conceit, and Prahlad Maharaj, who is the opposite, who is completely humble and free, 100% free of all pride. And Hiranyakashipu was very competitive towards the Lord and was very threatened by his son talking about the Supreme Personality of Godhead because of his feeling of competitiveness towards the Lord. And another interesting thing about the term prestige is that it comes from the French that means illusion that is brought on by magic. So it's wrapped up in this illusion. Even the term that we know in English is coming from that background of the term illusion. So to feel conceited is an illusion because we are taking our body and our mind and our self and our life as real, as the real permanent and special being, where it's a way of wanting to be God in this world. So there's two different ways that prestige can show up. One way is that we become wrapped up in this idea of I am myself, I am these qualities, I am my personality type, I am my everything about me. That's me. That's a way to get wrapped up in this false prestige. And then a second aspect of false prestige is to take credit for one's achievements. So the things that I put out into the world, that could be something as simple as the things that I share with my realizations or my family members or my job, anything that my achievements, my accomplishments become a source of this false prestige because I think they're mine. So again, we see this I, me, and mine in pride. So we're looking here at what pride is and how it's false, and what in this context of Mandatta, we're learning that it's possible to let go of that through contemplation and deep spiritual life, like he did in that moment, in that realization that he had. When we take pride in our achievements, it reminds me of this verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says that the ability in all human beings comes from him, right? The intelligence and the memory, everything that we have comes from Krishna. And so when we think it's ours, that means we're turning our face away from Krishna. It's a really clear indication that I'm not Krishna conscious when I think something is mine and that I have, it's others need to notice me. I was reflecting on my life in this context about just the way that pride pops up. And as an example, I'd like to share. So growing up, I would play mridanga. I always enjoyed playing the mridanga. And in kirtan, as a teenager, I would play a lot in the Hillsborough community in North Carolina. It's a small community. So my sister and I had a lot of opportunity to play. And I noticed very, very early on that when conceit would enter my consciousness as I was playing the drum in the kirtan, that in that moment thinking, oh, I'm so good at this. Look, I'm holding it down. People must think I'm so amazing at this. Then I would mess up on the rhythm almost instantaneously. And I noticed this pattern, and it was humorous, and it was also a real reminder. It was Krishna's way of, the Paramatma's way of reminding me, this is not you. It can be taken away at any moment. And so pride can even creep up in our spiritual life. That when we think we're the doer of our spiritual activity, like for example, someone might think I'm a learned devotee. I know all these verses and so on. Someone else might think I'm an ecstatic kirtaniya, ecstatic chanter. Those are things that can be taken away by time and by circumstance. For example, someone is proud about their intelligence and their ability to articulate or to pour out Sanskrit verses. All it takes is a little shift, something in the brain, something can happen, a little stroke or some dementia. And all of a sudden we realize that wasn't in my control to have that ability. That was just a blessing that Krishna gave me to use in his service at this time. And Krishna can take away those abilities and those opportunities. Because for Krishna, it's not about the external activity that we offer him. It's about our consciousness. And so he doesn't care whether he has another person who can, cook expertly or lead an amazing kirtan and so on. He's looking for the devotion. And so if he decides to take away an ability, that's his prerogative. And it's something to reflect on in our life, just to reflect on the things that we might feel some pride about and think about how fragile those are. Remember, our lives are like a drop of water on that lotus petal. And at any moment it could change and it could be taken away. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he actually described fame and material opulence, material happiness, that they are as valuable as the dung of a boar. So it's a very interesting analogy. And it shows you that it's not valuable at all. It's actually an impediment, the dung of a boar. So anytime that we can reflect on this past, anytime we notice that false prestige, that conceit, that arrogance, feeling like I know better, I'm so important, then we can remember Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's description of what that is. And remember, oh yeah, I'm in a low position right now, and I need to, again, remember who is giving me this. So in Mandata Maharaj's case, he was the emperor of the entire world, and yet he was able to let go of that pride connected with that opulence that he had and that position. So if he was able to do it for such an amazingly big thing, then what we can take from this is practicing in small ways. If I'm proud of being able to write nicely, to remind myself, oh yes, this is a gift from Krishna at this moment in time. It might be taken away from me. Let me use it to my full ability now and remember I'm not the doer. And sometimes we see devotees in the opposite, you could say kind of a dichotomy or irony, is that we can see pride demonstrated within the devotee, but yet it's so different. It's completely different from the pride of a materialistically oriented person. So the pride of, for example, we see that beautiful depiction of Srila Prabhupada where he stood, he said like Napoleon Bonaparte, like he put his head up high for that photo and held he would walk like that with a certain dignity and pride, but not pride in his own self, but pride in being a servant of Krishna. And it's completely different. One time when they were obtaining the land for the Ramanreti temple in Vrindavan, Shyamasundar, you know that story where he had picked the cards from the donor. The donor said, I would like to donate this, but I want to make sure I'm making the right decision. So the donors put yes and no on the card. And they said, you pick a card and whichever one it is will go like that. So Shyamasundar happened to pick the yes. I mean, not happened to, obviously it was Krishna's arrangement, but he picked yes. And so that way they obtained this land. And when he told Srila Prabhupada about it, they were discussing also the possibility of maybe having the headquarters in the Radha Damodar area, the center town of Vrindavan, because it was already a populated place, whereas Ramanreti was way out in the outskirts. And they thought, well, maybe people won't come as much, right? That was the kind of idea. So Shyamasundar presented that concern to Prabhupada. And he said, maybe we could just do something small out there in Ramanreti land and just do something small. And Prabhupada immediately responded, I don't do anything small. And so in that sense, if you were to hear those same words from a materialistically oriented person, you would think, wow, they're full of themselves, right? They just think they have so much. But when you hear it coming from a great, powerful, wonderful devotee like Srila Prabhupada, an acharya, a teacher, then those words take on a whole new meaning. I don't do anything small because I'm being empowered by Krishna, and for Krishna deserves the biggest, the most wonderful things. Therefore, I don't do anything small. So in reflecting on this particular wonderful trait of Mandata, just to take with us that humility comes when we realize that we're dependent on others and that we don't have it all. We're not free. We're not above needing help of others, and particularly the help of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So just reflecting on that, and a humble heart is also grateful, realizing that I've been given this opportunity, or I've been given this entire kingdom, right? Like Mandata Muni, whatever it is. And I'm grateful for this now, and knowing that it can end at any time, and I'm going to do everything in my ability to use this for Krishna. So now let's turn to this other characteristic that we see in this verse. And it's described here. So Mandata, king of the entire world, was struck with wonder when he saw the household opulence. Thus he gave up his false prestige in his position as emperor of the world. So what's interesting here, and that what he didn't do, again, this is something we learn from by how he did not respond, is a normal reaction, especially in the purport. Actually, Srila Prabhupada mentions everyone is proud of his own position, but he, the emperor, felt defeated in all the details of material happiness by the opulence of Sobhari Muni. So under normal materialistic conditioning, we would feel competitive, like, oh, this person's showing so much opulence, I'm going to show that I have even more. So there could be a tendency to have this competitive, envious nature. I don't want them to have more than me. I want to be the one who has the most, right? So another lesson that we learn from this pastime is that Mandata, in this case, was free from that envy. And that's what allowed him to move on in his spiritual journey. Because what he could have done is thought, well, my son-in-law, wow, he has so much. I'm going to go prove to him that I have even more. I'm going to show him. I'm going to give him a tour of my entire kingdom and so on. And competition happens, again, it ties into this idea of I, me, and mine, right? Competition is when we feel like we want to be better than others. And again, it stems from that tendency of the living entity to want to be God. So I want to feel better than others. I want to feel the best. So it's competitive thing. And envy is tied into that because I don't want them to have that happiness if I can't have it. Prabhupada, in the purport of the second verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam, so Canto 1, Chapter 1, Text 2, he actually talks about this competition. And I would like to read this to you because it ties in very well with what we're observing in the character of Mandata Muni. I call him Muni because actually afterwards he took renunciation. So in the material world, Prabhupada says, there is keen competition between animal and animal, man and man, community, community, nation and nation. But the devotees of the Lord rise above such competition. They do not compete with the materialist because they are on the path back to Godhead, where life is eternal and blissful. Such transcendentalists are non-envious and pure in heart, just like we see in the case of Mandata. In the material world, everyone is envious of everyone else, and therefore there is competition. But the transcendental devotees of the Lord are not only free from material envy, but are well-wishers to everyone. And they strive to establish a competitionless society with God in the center. So I love this phrase, competitionless society. A society, just imagine living in a world where there isn't this constant competition for being better than someone else, for lording it over another person, right? What a relief that would be for the soul to be in that sangha of devotees, again, in the spiritual context, where we're all just wanting the best for each other. Prabhupada says in another place, in a lecture he gave in Los Angeles in 1973, that anyone can test. So he says that we can test this within our own hearts. We can test this, whether I'm jealous or not, is a test for whether we're in the material or spiritual world. So this is very fascinating. I'd like to share this with you as well. And we can think, as I read this, think about our own life and this barometer, this test, how much jealousy, how much envy, how much competition do I have? And that's the barometer of how much materially conscious I am versus spiritually, right? Whether I'm in the material or spiritual world. So therefore, says Prabhupada, this Krishna consciousness movement is for such persons who are no more jealous, no more envy, perfect person. Those who are jealous and envious, they are within this material world. And those who are not jealous, they are in the spiritual world. Simple thing, you test yourself whether I am jealous, envious of my other associates, friends, everything, then I am in the material world. And if I'm not jealous, then I'm in the spiritual world. Anyone can test. There's no question of whether I'm spiritually advanced or not. You can test yourself. Just like if you're eating, you'll understand whether you are satisfied, whether your hunger is satisfied. You haven't got to take certificate from others. Similarly, if you test yourself, whether you are jealous, whether you are envious, then you are in the material world. And if you're not jealous, if you're not envious, then you're in the spiritual world. Then you can serve Krishna very nicely if you are not jealous. Because our enviousness has begun from Krishna, just like, okay, I'll end there. So the last point I would like to end with is then you can serve Krishna very nicely if you are not jealous. So, and he's repeating again and again, Srila Prabhupada would do this often in his talks, like really hammering this point in. And it's such a neat takeaway that we can reflect on, this barometer. So in our life, as we move through life, how often am I feeling jealousy? This little tinge, is there some of that left? And knowing that I need to work on that. So just making ourselves conscious as we move through life of this tendency towards envy and of competition. And one of the practical ways that we can deal with this, if it is an issue in our life, is again to reflect on gratitude. Because when we're focusing on the things that we have been given by the mercy of Krishna, then it doesn't leave room for comparisons and look at what they have. Because I'm so consumed with gratitude about the blessings that Krishna has given me that I don't need to worry about anybody else's situation. And I'm just very thankful. And so it creates that opportunity to practice being non-envious. And one last thing I'd like to share in the context of envy and working against it is that there was a neuroscience research that shows that we can actually change the structure of our brains to increase our contentment. And contentment is the opposite of competition and of envy, right? So feeling I have enough, I've been given enough by Krishna. So So even neuroscience backs it up that we can deliberately change the structure of our brain by consciously directing our attention toward what we're grateful for. Rather than focusing on those things that we don't have or what annoy us, we can consciously focus on what we're grateful for. And this, even in the material brain, enhances the pathways of happiness in the brain. And so if it works even on a material level, then what to speak of spiritually, if we can just focus on thanking Krishna, thank you for the gifts you've given me. And in both cases, with pride and envy, if we practice this gratitude, it resolves both of these issues. So again, looking at Mandata's response to the situation, he immediately thought, oh, I'm not going to become competitive or envious of Sobari Muni's opulent situation. I'm going to take on this position of letting go of my pride and letting go of my envy. So those two wonderful qualities, being free of pride and being free of envy, are demonstrated in this verse. So what we can do when we hear pastimes like this is we can reflect on, what did I learn from this devotee, and make the Bhagavatam come to life for us, because it is a living, it's a living incarnation of Krishna, right? Bhagavatam. And so if we really want to imbibe the lessons of the verse, like one verse like this has so much within it, we can actually pray to these personalities, make it come to life by praying to this great devotee, Mandata Maharaj, who later became Mandata Muni, and pray to him, please allow me to go through life in the same mood that you had showed us in this verse, that I don't become competitive, that I don't become jealous, and that I don't stay stuck in my pride, but I let that go. And so on that note, I would like to open it up for any questions or comments, reflections, things that you took with you.
Thank you so much, Shyamala Devi. It was amazingly good about, especially explaining about pride. It was so relevant and also very practical, how you said doing in small things, like how we can start in small situations, we can immediately think. So it was very practical and helpful. Thank you very much for a wonderful class. Adipurush, you'd like to add something?
Well, we know that she very wonderful class, very sweet. You're pointing out the fact that there's a tendency toward competitiveness, jealousy, envy, and then there's a status that's like a negative thing. Then there's the position of being satisfied. But beyond that is the actual generosity. And we're situated in giving, sharing to others. We're beyond jealousy and even beyond being satisfied, because we don't just want to stop at that neutral point. Prabhupada, he just gave. He put aside his own comfort, his own safety, his own preferences, his own ability to just rest, and he continually going forward. And he called it the Hare Krishna movement. He said, people want to come to my feet, but my feet are moving. I'm going. If you want to be with me, then you have to move. We're not just the Krishna. Although the children chant like that, we are satisfied living in the forest of Vrindavan, satisfied in devotional service. The principle that we have to give it in order to get it. So interesting. And how to be fixing the mind and keeping that switch in the forward motion of how can we give Krishna consciousness to others? How can we reach out to them? Not just the gentle and good, but even those that are like Dhira Janapriyo, the Goswamis, they were beloved by the gentle folk and by the ruffians. So sometimes we can start to give, but we only want to deal with people that are nice. But there are people that are in terrible pain and suffering, and they so much appreciate even a small gesture of affection, acknowledging that their existence and trying to give them Krishna consciousness. So wonderful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And for taking it to that next level, because yes, that's the real test of a Vaishnava, is how generous they are. So thank you for highlighting that.
I see Niti Lakshana Devi raised her hands.
Hare Krishna Mataji, wonderful class. I really enjoyed listening to you. I'm from Britain, by the way, and I really enjoyed the class, and I learned a lot from what you actually said. Saying that, last year I was going through a lot of phases after the COVID, and it involved my family members who used to give me a lot of stress in that. And I came to anxiety in that, and I felt that their vibes were not right for me. So I know maybe going away from the subject that you've been talking about, I don't know whether it is. I've stopped talking to them because of the situation that they put me into. And would you call that I'm being envious in any way by blocking them out of my life? Because obviously Krishna would not love me to do that, because your family is part of your, as a Vaishnava, I should not do that, but I feel so guilty that I have, but only for the reason that I was going through. So would you say I'm being envious in that way, or using pride?
Well, thank you for sharing. I don't think it's that simple to answer, and I would take some deep reflection on your part to reflect on this whole situation. And since I don't know the whole situation, I would just say that one thing, it helps to get the advice from devotees, someone you really trust in your life, and to also know that we have to be authentic on our journey and have to be at the level that we're at. So if we're not able to get to this, like the level that we're talking about today and described in the Bhagavatam, just knowing we're on the journey, and it's okay. Like sometimes we're not going to be 100% there, but knowing that you're in your heart, you're working on it and you would like to be more generous, but at this time, it sounds like this is not a good fit for you and so on. So what's best for your spiritual life. And if you speak with someone in your life, in your close circle, who you really can trust and who can shed some insight, then I think that would be very helpful.
Okay, thank you for your advice.
Thank you.
I'll give you some answers.
There's a Vedic principle when we're trying to influence someone to go in a positive direction, whether a child or a disciple or a friend, like she's talking family members. Samadana Veda Danda. You know that? Samadana Veda Danda. So first we try to explain to them what would be good by intelligence, and then Dana, we give them incentive. Come to the program and you do something for them or give them something as an incentive. Then Samadana Veda. You know that one, Veda? Veda means separation. Sometimes people are in a relationship and they realize that my partner really not coming along and really even stepping, dragging me down. So you might separate that person because you love them.
Okay.
Sometimes a parent will withdraw from the child for the sake of uplifting that child. It's a tool. Samadana Beta. Of course, the last one is done to use the stick, but not recommended to say when you hit them, But Beta is a genuine, but not just, I'm not going to be with them because I don't like what they, no. A Beta because this will help them to understand, hey, I'm serious. I'm withdrawing from you because I care about you, because I'm trying to help you to learn something. So that can be instrumental. The motivation for withdrawal is very important. And when we put something before Krishna, we say, Krishna, I don't know what to do in this situation, but I'll do whatever you like. I'll go to them or I'll stay away from them. Whatever you like, not what I like, not what's easy. But I will, the Amish people, when their children get into the teenage years, they're 16 years old, they say, okay, go. Mm-hmm. Go to intoxication, go to promiscuity, do whatever you want. We will shun you. We will not speak to you while you're separating yourself from the religious community. So they never stop loving the child.
This meeting is being recorded. I got it.
Somebody has something to say there.
Well, good morning. Matthew Seva has made his way.
We can't hear you.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, I was reminded of how Srila Prabhupada sometimes would tell disciples to, in certain situations, that they would to separate themselves from the family because of the negative influence. So it's very individual to the circumstances. And sometimes the best approach will be to separate, and other times will be to really work on it. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much both
So I see.
for helping me my answers. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Hare Krishna.
I also see Loka Devi's hand is raised, so if she's here.
Yes, Hare Krishna. Thank you for the class, Shyamala. It's very sweet. And so many nice points. And I was just reflecting, I mean, people are reflecting on so many of the different, the nectar of the great points that you made. But one of the things I was reflecting on that was very much brought to life by your story of Mridanga playing, and you know what would happen when you took it upon yourself to say it was about you. And so often in those situations, you know, I know my default is, why is this happening to me? Or what's, you know, what did I do wrong? Why? And it was just a really nice example, as you see throughout this past time anyway, of the way in which the Lord will co-create with us. You know, we'll work together to give us what we need to really advance. That it's not punishment, that things that happen are not necessarily bad. And sometimes they feel bad. You know, we make judgments about it's the way this has occurred. It's a negative thing, when in fact it's really almost just like the warning bell, or the, you know, the notice this now, you know, to help us move past some obstacle or anartha that's keeping us from going forward full steam. So I really appreciated that little pastime in the way you described the idea that at any moment, you know, something may be taken away, but when it is, it's so often the way that the super soul is communicating with us about, no, you know, stay the course. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Loka Prabhu. It's nice to hear from you. Yeah, it's like when we go to the doctor and they give a medicine, it can be bitter and we know we don't want it at the time, but afterwards we're grateful to that doctor for helping cure us. And so that's what spirit soul is doing within our heart. So thank you for your reflection.
Thank you.
It's recommended to say, this isn't happening to me, this is happening for me, because Krishna loves me.
Thank you. Yes. Thank
you, Mother Shyamala. Yeah, Miss, there are so many comments also on the chat box expressing their gratitude and appreciation for the various points that you made. So extremely grateful for such a wonderful, insightful talk. Very grateful for your presence. Thank you everyone for joining. So Her Grace Shyamala Kishori Devi ki jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Bye.
Hare Krishna everyone.
Hare Krishna.